Hey everybody, welcome to DTNS Experiment Week. All this week, DTNS is on vacation, summer vacation. So we handed over the feed to our friends to try some stuff out. Each of them has an experimental podcast idea that they'd like your feedback on. So please send us your feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com, or leave your feedback at patreon.com/DTNS. We'll pass it along to them. And remember, each one of these is their podcast, so they are responsible for the content, but we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, DTNS listeners. Thank you to the DTNS team for inviting us over here for their experimentation week. I'm Will from Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm also here with Brad.
I'm Brad. It's true.
Hi, Brad.
Hi.
So the kind folks over there asked us to give a quick pitch about what our show is. This episode is a fairly representative episode. We do a mixture of deep dives into new and exciting and important technologies. Things like, I don't know, Wi-Fi and electric cars.
Electric vehicles, yes.
How batteries work. Kind of whatever we think is interesting at any given time. We'll take a whole 45-minute or hour-long episode and kind of peel the onion. Start with something that's simple, get into more and more complicated topics the longer we go. We also do the occasional trip down memory lane. We look at old important technologies like the Xbox 360 or Windows.
Sometimes rank all of the Windows in existence.
We did once upon a time in a completely non-controversial way rank a Windows. People loved that. This episode that you're going to listen to is one of those. This is we looked at what we found to be one of the more important pieces of interface hardware for the computer, the original optical mouse from Microsoft way back in the 90s. And then we also do a monthly Q&A. So if you have questions about technology, you have questions about what's happening in the news, you have questions about something that you're working on, some project that you're doing, you can do that. And we do this every week, every Sunday at midnight. The show comes up.
Yeah. Everything from, like you said, EVs and battery tech to like video game emulation and retro computing to space travel.
Yes.
Linux and home servers, DIY projects we're working on. Like we did a disaster preparedness episode one time, a wide range of topics, let's say.
Wide range of all centered around technology. So you can find us at techpod.content.town. Again, it's techpod.content.town, or just search for Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod wherever podcasts are found. And now on with the show. Brad, I think I bought old guy shoes by accident.
Again?
What do you mean again?
Look, man, I have bad news about your old guy status.
Look, I wore cool. I wore Sambas for a long time, and then I switched to Stan Smiths. Yeah,
you wore open source file sharing on your feet.
Well, I mean, kind of, yeah, but also like indoor soccer shoes, I guess technically is what they are.
Oh, those are wow. Those, I've never. Oh, that is an Adidas type of shoe.
That's it's a specific W toe, not the Clyde with the round toe, but the W toe front with the 5 stripes, and usually white is this. I've been doing Stan Smiths for the last little bit.
Yeah, those are classic.
Yeah, it's a good shoe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
those are not your old guy shoes, to be clear.
No. So I've started doing a thing where I have a pair of shoes that I just wear around the house that I don't really wear outside because I can't walk around barefoot because my feet hurt if I do that.
Okay. I was going to say that's the only way it's acceptable to wear shoes in the house at this point, at least around here.
Well, we had a dog for a long time. So the dog poops in the yard and then walks in. We don't wash her feet. So I assume I'm not worried about cleanliness of the floors.
Fair.
However, like during the pandemic, when I didn't leave the house at all for a long time, I bought a pair of these cloud foam shoes because they popped up on Amazon one day and they were like $30. I was like, these look awesome. They were slip-on Adidas. Like they had like a little elastic things over the arch. They kind of held in place and didn't flop around like a sandal or something or a clog. And they were great. And then I wore them out, and they don't make those anymore because they update them every year. So I didn't buy this year's version because those were like $90 and that's more than I'm paying for this. But I bought last year's version, which were cheap the other day, and I got them, and they're old guy shoes.
Wait, aren't they the same kind? How did that happen?
The design changes every year. I can hold it up, but like the upshot is,
let's real time gauge your flexibility. Can you get your foot into frame?
I just took it off. So here's the old one.
Okay.
The old one's gray. Has like a foamy sole.
There's something H.R. Giger-esque about those laces, I'm afraid, but otherwise, they look kind of like a futuristic shoe.
I thought that was a selling point, actually. And then these are the new ones, and they have Adidas in huge letters across the front.
What in the world? old?
and they're white. They're real white.
I don't know if I'd say those are old guy. I could see those being fashionable in some context.
I think they feel like old guy shoes.
So like, wow, the design is completely different from year to year, apparently.
Well, the main thing that's the same is the sole is the same, and like the fact that it's a slip-on with some sort of stretchy upper is the same every year, I think.
I mean, if you want to talk about what defines old guy footwear,
I mean, they're not New Balances.
I think it's the preference for slip-ons, which, to be clear, I am completely sold on.
Like I have shoes with laces for hiking and sporting activities, power walking.
Yeah.
You know, go to the mall stomping.
Yes, sometimes you need a secure fit, but then sometimes you just want to glide in there and go.
Well, the thing is, if I'm in the kitchen, I'm cooking, I'm on my feet for a long time. Like I made some pizza dough today, right? I was in there for like 30 minutes at a time, kneading and stirring and whatnot. And I wanted my arches supported. I wanted to be comfortable, so I was walking on clouds.
Yeah, look, I get it. I am on my first and so far only pair of slip-on shoes. There's some Skechers. They were cheap, but
okay. Do you do like a sandal slide ever? You got like a slide, like a shower sandal type situation, like an Adidas slide or a, it's like an arch top. You put your foot in. It's got a soft cushy. Yes. You wear them to the pool.
I thought you meant to wear into the shower.
Well, I mean, in college, you would have worn them into the shower so you don't get some sort of foot fungus.
Yes.
But now we're adults. We don't have that problem anymore.
Yes.
But I like a slide too. Somebody stole my slides at the pool a couple of weeks ago.
That sounds like a pool foul to me.
I was pretty upset. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. Hello.
Brad, we're going to do something new today.
New?
Yeah, we're going to sit down.
New is scary.
And we're going to make a list of all of the software and we're going to rank it.
Okay. Sounds like a great idea that everyone will receive lovingly.
We're just going to start at the top and we're going to come up with, we're going to like throw out ideas and we're going to be like, okay, this one's better than, no, we're not going to do that.
Never done it before.
People were upset by that and we're never going to talk about it again.
Yeah.
But we are going to do the thing that we did the last time we referenced the listing of all software.
Which was?
Well, we picked an important piece of hardware, an important piece of technology that changed the market.
A product, if you will.
A product that changed everything that came after it. And we talked about why it changed it. And we did a little bit of a, hey, here's what it was like at the time when this thing came out. It was the Xbox 360 for folks who don't remember.
Yeah.
We're going to look at it with the benefit of hindsight, which is the best kind of sight, it turns out.
Yes. Well,
look, foresight's good.
Foresight also, I mean, depending on how accurate it is, foresight, pretty good.
Foresight's kind of a crapshoot, though, in my experience.
Yeah, that is true. I'm pulling that episode up. I'll stick it in the show notes. That was 183.
It was episode 183 from, it was the middle of last year. It was like May of last year.
I'm going to read the first line of the description. We're going to start taking the occasional look at a product that changed everything in its respective field.
Brad, it's occasional.
Starting this week with the game console that redefined how consoles work in the online era, the Xbox 360. Yes, I suppose occasional does mean roughly once a year.
You foreshadowed the episode we're doing today, the product that we're going to highlight today in that intro.
Did I?
I listened to it right before we recorded the episode here. You said we're even going to look at some maybe minor products, you said. Like the IntelliMouse Explorer, which was, for folks who don't know, the year was 1999.
The year was 1999.
The year. It was a massive period of change in the PC space.
We said this before while we were going over the notes for this. Every time we try to talk about like setting the stage in terms of the era, it just sounds like a really shitty Star Wars opening crawl.
Yeah. The Empire, Microsoft, was taking over all of PCs. Apple was down and out. It was a bad time for a lot of stuff. But no, this was like 1999 was in smack dab in the middle of the transition of the PC from a business tool and a thing for weird nerds to a thing that everybody had in their house.
Yeah. Yeah. It's turned out to be a great time for just rapid advances in, like, say, computer accessories.
Yeah. Like, and it was also kind of the first time that like you could go to a normal store local to you and just buy computer stuff. Like before 1998, 95, really, like if you needed a new mouse, you had to go to some weird screwdriver shop on the other side, on the bad side of the train tracks. And it was usually dimly lit. There was some guy in the back smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
And like they were all sitting up on those high stools, but on low counters.
Yes, the beards were substantial.
Yeah, it was like maybe if you also wanted ham radio parts, they had those in there.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1999, you could walk into any Best Buy in the country and you could buy you could choose between 5 different mice.
Yeah, like
maybe
Best
6.
Best Buy was my example here. Do you know what year they started? Because I think this is around the time I remember them starting to spring up everywhere. And they were, at least where I live, they were the first like big box retailer where you could go get computer stuff because we didn't have Fry's or Micro Center, assuming those even existed at that point.
We had a CompUSA in Knoxville, but that was open before that. But Best Buy opened in like 96, 97 in North, where I was.
Sure.
Definitely when I was in college. So yeah, it was an exciting time. There was a lot of stuff happening in PCs. We were getting like computer speakers were going from like these little crappy plastic unamplified boxes that plugged in and would kind of make sounds come out. Or in some cases, just a thing you plugged into your motherboard and went, meh,
yep,
to like a real ass Altic Lansing speaker set or Cambridge Soundworks speaker set or something like that.
Yeah, this was exactly the era of the Cambridge Soundworks PC Works cubes that I feel like everybody who ever touched Quake got all at the same time.
If you read Shack News, you got those. Yes. Or Scary's Quake Holio back then, I think. And if you read Redwood.Stomp, you got the Altic Lansing ACS 96s.
Yes, but like PC speakers with actual subwoofers, optical mice, which we will talk about here. 3D accelerators were getting good. Like USB was finally starting to show up in everything.
Yeah, if you had Windows 98, you could even use USB. It was really exciting.
Yeah, it was an exciting time to be using computers because everything got plug and play for that matter. Although it's not a physical accessory, but like computing got really good in the late 90s.
And at the same time, like PC gaming was kind of like action PC gaming was taking off. First person shooters were rising. There was a large online community of people who were playing these new kind of action like Twitch games on their PCs that happened like because the CPUs were getting faster, but also because 3D acceleration was starting, right? Where 3DFX was had shipped the Voodoo and was onto the Voodoo 2 by this time. We were seeing early cards from NVIDIA and early 3D accelerators from ATI and Matrox and a bunch of other companies. And one of the things that came out of this was these communities, these online game communities were talking about what mice were good for games, what mice were good for first person shooters. And at the time, a mouse was a fairly standard design. It was like 2 buttons, maybe 3 if you were fancy. It had a big ball in the bottom and you rolled it on a neoprene mat on your desktop. And they were basically all the same. Like there were some that were better than others. Some the buttons were less likely to double click. Sometimes the mouse wheel would be a little bit stickier, a little bit less sticky, whatever. And then in 1999, the year was 1999. A scrappy software company in Redmond, Washington,
an upstart hardware maker
released the IntelliMouse Explorer.
I mean, to be fair, like I don't know how early Microsoft was in hardware at this point, right? I mean, they obviously didn't start as a hardware company. I mean, this was around the time that I remember hearing, though, like, hey, Microsoft hardware is actually quite good, because this was very much in the era of the Microsoft with a $, micro shit. Everybody hated Microsoft.
You went to Slashdot. There was their Microsoft stories had a little icon of Bill Gates dressed up like a Borg on it.
Right. Like Microsoft was widely seen as a brand to avoid. But then like around the time this mouse came out and some of the keyboards at this time, people were like, oh, like Microsoft hardware is actually like surprisingly quite good.
Yeah. So they had made a mouse for a while. They'd made mice for a while. They were making gamepads and game controllers. And like this is when we were starting to get into the force feedback era and seeing some weird force feedback joysticks and wheels and stuff like that for them. But the IntelliMouse Explorer was the sequel to their original IntelliMouse. It was the IntelliMouse was the first mouse with a scroll wheel. Okay,
that was going to be one of my questions: is if the scroll wheel predated the optical sensor. I could not remember, but did that actually happen around the same time?
Yeah, so the scroll wheel happened a few years before. They rolled it out as hey, you can now make this is for making it easier to go up and down in your windows, which I am. As always with Microsoft, I assume that they had some user research because even back then they were really good at user research, and they saw that people moving the cursor over to the sidebar was a problem. It's funny in retrospect, right?
Sure. Now that I think about it, I guess the rise of the scroll wheel mirrored the rise of the web.
100%.
Because people were doing documents, obviously, like people were writing doc files and stuff on their PCs, but you don't scroll those up and down that much, and you page up and down, or you're just typing to scroll those, like the very long form document that you need to scroll vertically rapidly was pretty much started with the web, right?
Yep. One-handed scrolling invented with the dawn of the web. You can snicker for a moment and then we'll move on.
Just going to let that one pass.
But yeah, so the mouse wheel had been out for a while. The IntelliMouse Explorer was a fairly standard, it's a fairly standard design by modern standards, but it was pretty revolutionary at the time. It wasn't beige. It was this kind of silvery metallic.
Mm-hmm.
It had two main buttons, a clickable scroll wheel, just like the IntelliMouse, the original IntelliMouse. It added two thumb buttons, which was interesting. I think by default, they bound to forward and back.
Yes.
Your browser controls.
Yeah, I mean, I think even more than the scroll wheel, those side buttons were 1,000% just browser forward and back buttons.
Yeah, they were. I think that's why it had Explorer in the name, was because it was designed to work with Internet Explorer. The hot new browser from those scrappy kids up in Redmond. The mouse wheel was super useful. This was I think the IntelliMouse is where the scroll 3 lines default started.
Okay.
Because Logitech mice would scroll single line and IntelliMouse would scroll multiple lines. And that stayed the way it was until like trackpads took over 10, 15 years later. What's
your scroll style these days? So clicky?
I use a G Pro, a Logitech G Pro Superlight.
Is that one of the ones that can kind of release the tension on the wheel and just let it glide?
No, it's the ultimate lightness. So they get rid of that mechanism. So mine's clicky. I'm a clicky wheel.
Yes, no, I also am. You may be surprised to hear I like the old style clicky, but mine is one of the ones that will just scroll infinitely if you let it.
I like a weighted spinner, but not for games. Anyway, the mouse had a red taillight. It was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I remember that being kind of a big selling point. It's just like, look at it, it's glowing.
Yeah, the whole bottom was this translucent plastic, and it had a red taillight because it was the first mouse that had an optical sensor. Well, asterisk. It was the first mouse that had an optical sensor that didn't require some special mouse pad. There were a bunch of mice that predated it that shipped from like Sun Microsystems shipped with their Spark stations an optical mouse pad that had a special reflective mouse surface that would reflect a signal down into the mouse and then back up into the sensor on the mouse. But those mouse pads sucked. You couldn't use them for games really. The thing slid around on the desk like crazy. It was nice because you didn't have to clean it, but other than that, not a mainstream product, not something normal people were going to buy.
Yeah, I went and checked. I mean, you're probably unsurprised to hear that optical mice, the concept of the optical mouse had been demonstrated as early as like 1980. That I think MIT and Xerox like independently both were working on it at the time, but obviously took, as usual, took a couple of decades for all the parts and stuff that was required to reach consumer grade pricing.
So why does an optical mouse, why does it cost $80, which was kind of a lot for a mouse back then.
Yes. But also when you think about how I'm thinking back to the mice I owned before one of these.
Oh yeah.
Extremely worth it. Like I think I remember at the time when I got one, although I did not get this one, I got the IntelliMouse optical, I believe, which we'll get to because there are a bunch of variants that we'll talk about. But I remember by the time I got it, I was like, whatever, I'll just take whatever you want.
Yeah.
Give me one of these things. Like ball mice are so awful.
Yeah. So why does this rate product that changed an entire market? Yeah, I'm going to argue that this mouse spawned pretty much the entire gaming specialty hardware market indirectly.
Man, that's a pretty broad claim, but I'll hear you out.
There was before this, Razer had released their first gaming mouse, which was they called the Boom Slang. It was a big, wide, flat guy with a ball. It was a ball mouse, mechanical mouse, 2 buttons. I think it had a wheel.
Wow, I don't think I realized Razer had been around that long.
Yeah, Razer had been around for a minute. It may have been the same summer, but it was like the Boom Slang had been out before this.
Okay.
This was a PS2 and USB mouse, also worth mentioning. The reason this was a big deal is because it moved the fidelity of mouse tracking from a mechanical sensor to a digital sensor. And we should talk about how mice worked, I think, before we go any further, because it's important. A mechanical mouse had a ball in the bottom. It was in a little well. There was a cap on the bottom of the well that kind of held the ball in place, and it floated in this space. But when you pushed the mouse on a surface, the ball would roll, and that would roll two rollers that were placed on an X and Y axis facing each other, like 90 degrees off of each other inside the mouse. Those little rollers, when the ball rolled, would turn these big wheels, and the wheels were usually attached to a photodiode. So the wheels had holes in them, and then there was a photodiode that straddled the wheel, and one side would produce a little bit of light, and the other side had a light sensor, and the wheel would have a grate, like a screen, almost like a series of dark and light of holes and I guess not holes, I don't know, spokes basically. So when the wheel spun, when the rotor spun, the wheel would turn, and the light would pass through the holes, and the pattern, the speed of the light in the dark would tell the mouse logic how fast it was moving in the X or Y direction. Now, the upshot of this, and there were other ways that people did this, like it wasn't all wheels shining through lights. I think actually the boom slang used a slightly different mechanism, but it was still roller turns wheel triggers an electric sensor that sends a signal that can be interpreted as acceleration and velocity. The upshot of this is that the size of the holes and the size of the wheel, and thus the physical space inside the mouse, imparted a hard upper limit to the mechanical mouse precision.
Okay, that was going to be exactly my question. Is that the DPI, the fidelity of these things, I think, had to be pretty limited, right?
It was very low. Especially by modern standards. And the other thing is the slippage of the ball against the rollers also caused like problems with acceleration. So if you move the mouse too quickly, the ball would just slide on the surface. If your mouse pad didn't have enough friction, if the ball on the mouse pad didn't have enough friction, if you got enough hand gunk into the ball of the mouse, then it would slide on the rollers, and you would lose precision.
For people who were not alive at the time, like every one of these had like a little kind of turn, like a dial turn release mechanism where you could kind of pop a door off and take the ball out, because you had to clean that thing quite regularly.
You had to clean the ball, and you had to scrape goo off of the rollers, which was the bad part.
Dust and gunk.
It was like belly button gunk.
Yeah. Ugh. What was the composition of the average mouse ball? Like they were kind of like silicone rubber,
like hard
covered,
rubber.
Yeah, something like that.
They were usually pretty heavy,
pretty weighty, pretty dense. I remember.
Well, because they had to be a certain amount. They had to be a certain amount of mass to they needed to ride and make the rollers move, even when they were being pushed up by the surface underneath them. You also it's hard. It's funny thinking about it now. You needed a pretty even surface. Like if your desk was uneven, the ball would skip, and like you would lose traction. It was anyway. Fast movements, sudden stops, all of that were bad for these mice. Yeah. And as a result, like this is why a lot of the early shooters didn't have headshots, I think, is because you couldn't actually land them with any kind of precision.
You get a fair amount of jitter also when you picked it up, because that jostled the ball, and that would move the mechanics a little bit as you were lifting and setting it down.
Yeah. And you had to clean the ball too. Nope. Most people didn't clean their balls.
Make sure you always clean your balls.
Always keep your mouse balls clean. Okay, upper limit. The rotary encoders had an upper limit that was caused by the sensors, and just to be clear, if somebody hadn't developed these optical sensors, there probably would have been another advancement that gave us better DPI on a more mechanical process, right? I'm not saying that this is the only way this could have been solved. We could have used different kinds of sensors for the rotary encoders, all sorts. There's a million different ways you could solve this problem, but this is the one we did, and it worked out really well. Because the way optical mice work is you had a light source, you had a CMOS sensor, and it's basically a little camera. And then you had the signal from that CMOS sensor got captured hundreds or thousands of times a second. And it got piped into a DSP, a digital signal processor, that detected differences in those images. And by measuring the number of pixels, the markings on the image shifted one direction or the other, it could infer motion of the mouse, and was less. There was no physical moving parts. There was no slippage between the ball and the rollers. There was no place for gunk to get. Although if you did get I used to get dog hair in mine, and that would jack it up at a horrific level. But it was a much better solution, and the benefit is that it went from being something that required mechanical advancements and sensor advancements there to just being, hey, this is all made of silicon. And Brad, you know what we're really good at optimizing?
What's that?
Silicon.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, when I think about this, though, it's not 1999 was not exactly the dark ages, but when I think about the kind of image processing that needs to take place to track Because you're not just tracking change over time, it's directional change. Like you need very precise detection of which direction the image is changing from frame to frame. And I wonder what the algorithms were like at the time. Is it just like one frame compared to the previous frame, or are they doing it across multiple frames? You know what I mean? Like thinking about the hardware that was available at the time to do this kind of processing.
My guess is that it's gotten much more complicated in the last 20 years.
Yes, and the speed with which you need to do it to make it feel real time and feel responsive and accurate feels like a lot for a consumer device at this time, but obviously they solved it.
Yeah, so I mean, the upshot of this though is that in the 20 years since this mouse came out, 25 years since this mouse came out, we've gone from, hey, every mouse has a ball with these plastic circles on it that have holes cut in it that we shine light through, to a $30 mouse has like an 8K DPI sensor, and you can get a $70 mouse that pulls at 1,000 hertz with a high resolution sensor wirelessly, right?
That's a lot of fidelity. That's probably more than all but the highest level esportist, e-athlete probably is looking for.
Well, I mean, yeah, we've reached a point where on a $150 mouse, most people can't physically move their arm faster than the mouse can track.
Yeah,
which is kind of crazy, and it tracks at a high degree of accuracy. There's no slippage, there's no lag, there's no all of that stuff is good. I think this might, like, I haven't been able to confirm this, but my recollection is that this is the first mouse I ever saw with the thumb buttons too. I think the optical sensor is the big sea change here, but I think the thumb buttons, like, we saw a massive explosion in mice shortly after this, right? Like both mice for work, like the rise of the Logitech started doing, they did haptic mice. They did mice with like haptics that bumped when you moved over UI interface stuff, or when you shot in Half-Life, stuff like that. You saw mice that had the free spinning wheel that you mentioned before. You saw mice that were designed to play WoW and had like 9 thumb buttons on them.
I think, wasn't there a mouse that had like something like 20 programmable buttons at one point? Like that was like deep into the MMO heyday, I think.
Yeah, you saw mice that were modular, that you could take a chunk. There was one that I think Razer made that had 3 side panels. One was like a circle, one was like that big 20 button grid, and one was just normal 2 buttons. You saw ambidextrous, you saw right-handed mice. You never saw left-handed mice because, sorry, lefties, not my choice. But you saw mice that were modular. You saw mice that you could add weight to. You saw mice that you could remove weight to. You saw, like, at one point I reviewed a mouse that had a grate on the back and had a little fan inside it that blew air on your hand to keep your hand dry when you were playing games.
That seems maybe less than practical.
It sucked. It was a bad mouse. But the upshot is, and I realize this is like the 6th time I've said upshot in this episode, but there was in the same way that like the game controllers in the late 90s were out of control and everybody was trying to develop a first person shooter controller because they thought they would then be the flight stick for this burgeoning market. The same thing was happening in the mouse space. Like every crazy idea was getting made, and a lot of really interesting stuff happened as a result of it. And I think it all started because of this IntelliMouse Explorer 1.0.
Yeah, I think so. So should we go through the product line, because there are actually like at least half a dozen different IntelliMouse products, IntelliMouse branded products, but they're fairly different.
Well, there's one really important thing to say about this mouse before we go on. It's that this optical sensor kind of sucked.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't great. It was you didn't have to clean it, which was really nice. It was fine for games if you were like a low sensitivity, lots of big movements player, right? If you had a big mouse pad and you were moving your whole arm constantly across your thing, if you were like a little just flick of the wrist person, probably not a great mouse for you. And there was a lot of talk in the community at the time. When I reviewed, I think I reviewed the follow-up to this, the 2nd gen of this, not the 1st gen, because I wasn't at maximum PC yet at this time. I did not realize how many people were quick flick people at the time. And a lot of that was because I was used to using balls, right? So I was using slow mouse movements and all that. And a lot of people had learned to kind of counteract the acceleration of the ball and work within that so they could do quick turns at really high sensitivity. Anyway, doesn't matter. But it was like the sensors improved dramatically in a really short period of time because, like I said, they're silicon and we're good at making. We got much better at making CMOS sensors over the 10 years following because we started putting them in. Like we started making point and shoot cameras out of CMOS sensors, and DSLRs eventually got made out of CMOS sensors. So now we're really, really good, it turns out, at making CMOS sensors. Same thing for DSPs. Anyway, they spawned a whole bunch of other IntelliMouse out of this. The first one was the 2000 IntelliMouse optical with IntelliEye. That's the ambidextrous one.
Yeah, so that's the one I had.
And it was kind of a lighter, it was a beige. It was beige with red highlights. I think it still had the tail light though.
I don't know if I'd call it, I think it was more of a off-white, cream, maybe cream, or maybe more of a grayish white. It didn't look like corny beige white like you expected from your shitty beige box, no name power case or whatever. It felt like a cool kind of white gray kind of thing.
Yeah.
It felt futuristic. I don't know how I ended up with that one because it seems like the IntelliMouse Explorer with the ridge, the hump, is the one everybody looks back on fondly. But I liked the optical quite well.
Well, the Explorer was also it was one of the early ergonomic designs, right? Because a lot of the others were flat and small, and you weren't supposed to be using them for 8 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
They released a version of the original IntelliMouse, the beige one, with an optical sensor instead of a ball almost immediately. Couldn't find a date on that actually. But I did find the original press release for the IntelliMouse.
Yeah, the deeper I get into like kind of data preservation, data archiving, going back and looking for not just my old data, but also just across the internet, stuff like this that is rapidly disappearing. I can't believe Microsoft still has like all of their old press releases in the same modern interface. This thing is literally dated April 19th, 1999. Microsoft's sleek new IntelliMouse Explorer and IntelliEye technology tossed out the mouse ball today at Comdex.
It's kind of amazing. This is when we still had 2 Comdex. This was a spring Comdex, not fall Comdex. But they talk about gone are the mouse ball and other moving parts inside the mouse. Microsoft IntelliEye equips the IntelliMouse Explorer with an optical sensor and digital signal processor, helping it avoid its traditional enemies such as crumbs, dust, and grime. Mm-hmm. It'll track movement on virtually any surface as long as they don't say this, but it was as long as it wasn't shiny. If it was glass or metal, it was a hard no-go.
Yes. Can you imagine using a computer designed in 1968? Said Tim McDonough, mouse line product manager at Microsoft. Yet we think nothing of using 30-year-old mouse technology.
This is some real Hank Hill salesmanship here.
Yeah.
The fact that they marketed it, they tried to brand the optical sensor as they don't say. I guess they do say optical sensor in here, but they don't say IntelliEye. I mean, they don't say. They're trying to make it a thing.
In the header, yes, IntelliEye, a new approach and a smarter mouse. IntelliMouse just rolls off the tongue. IntelliEye, like 2 vowels up against each other like that.
It's hard. It's a hard read.
That was an off day in the marketing department, I'm afraid.
In addition to IntelliEye optical tracking technology and radical design, IntelliMouse Explorer features 2 customizable function buttons that add an unprecedented level of convenience and flexibility. The buttons, located on the left side of the mouse, provide effortless internet navigation with forward and back default settings. But they can be remapped easily to other useful program commands such as print, copy, paste, or save. Can you imagine putting print on your thumb button? That would be annoying.
I guess I could see use for it. You work in an office maybe and have a gaming mouse.
Yeah, I guess I have to print a lot.
Looking at this thing now, like it's kind of crazy to me that I somehow ended up with that ambidextrous optical with the back and forward buttons on either side of the mouse, because these days I feel like it's like buttons around your thumb is where back and forward go now, right? So like I think I was like thumb and pinky finger to go forward and back at that time, and that's just kind of weird. Think about now. Look,
it's nice that they make the ambidextrous mouse for the left-handers, but I'm not interested. I guess I'm using one right now, but don't tell anybody. It was they made the IntelliMouse, the ambidextrous one. They updated it in 2001, upgrading the sensor from a 1500 frames per second sensor, which gave you a maximum flick speed of 1.5 meters per second, to a 6000 frames per second sensor. I don't know how fast the flick speed was on that because they didn't care about it by that point. They updated it again in 2006. This is the famed IntelliMouse Explorer 3.0. This is, I think, maybe the most controversial sensor because by that time, other people were doing better stuff for games. It had a little bit of a stair-steppy where it would move you, where you could move vertically and horizontally, but it was on different ticks. So there was weird stuff happening there. It was a 9,000 frames per second sensor in 2006, and I think 3,000 DPI, but I'm not 100% on that.
Okay. 2006, thinking back, is I feel like other brands had caught up pretty dramatically by that point, because I think that's right around the time I got my Logitech MX518, which is like probably my favorite mouse of all time if I really had to put it down on a list.
I think if this was if we were talking about the thing that made gaming mouse a real thing, it's the 518 probably.
Yeah.
Right. That was the first one that I looked at. I was like, oh, this is actually a really good mouse.
Yeah. Like felt really great in the hand with the thumb groove and everything, like for action games. But obviously, like, they owe a pretty significant debt to Microsoft for kicking this stuff off.
The 518 came out in,
I think it was 2006 also, or 2005. Sorry. Right before the 3.0 IntelliMouse Explorer.
Yeah, and the 518 was the first mouse that I saw with a variable DPI, where you could adjust the DPI on the unit. So there were two buttons that could make the DPI go up or down. Which, it's funny, in the modern era, I don't ever do it all. At the time, playing like Battlefield and stuff like that, I remember turning the DPI down to snipe.
Really?
Yeah.
I always thought it was a cool feature and concept that I never felt like I could actually use practically on the fly. Like, I don't know what the cognitive effect is of being used to a certain like input sort of tick rate or smoothness, like your brain gets thrown off very quickly, right? Like
there's a muscle memory thing, right?
Yeah. Or like a perception memory sort of something, a perception muscle there. Like I've been playing Fallout 1 on stream recently, and because it's such an old game, the mouse sampling, the control is extremely different.
Oh yeah.
And I don't bother to change my Windows settings because I don't want to have to redo everything afterwards. But when I come out of that game after 2 or 3 hours of playing it, the mouse in Windows feels like it's broken. Like it literally
insanely fast.
No, sluggish, because it's so much faster. It's so much more sensitive.
Oh wow.
Or I think it might be that there's no mouse acceleration in Fallout, and like actually mouse acceleration might be its own topic to talk about here, because I think that was also probably getting a lot better or becoming a lot more widespread at this time. But yeah, like when I go back into Windows from Fallout, like the mouse, the input feels completely wrong because I've just for 2 or 3 hours have been doing something different. So like the idea of changing DPI mid shooter match always just felt like it would throw me off too much.
Do you leave acceleration on?
I do. I just, whatever Windows is, the default is what can you even change that at this point?
I don't know that you can anymore.
I don't know if they still expose that.
Pointer options, enhanced pointer precision, that's off.
It also depends on which control panel you're in, because I assume they're still both in here.
Yeah, they're both in here.
I don't know which one overrides which.
Yeah, I don't see acceleration in here anymore, which I think is gone. Means it's gone.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually.
But you shouldn't need it on a modern mouse because the DPI is such that you can move from side to side across your screen without.
Sure.
Yeah.
So actually, that's something I wanted to take the opportunity of this episode to ask you about, because you probably know. Is there a sweet spot to be found, or could you help explain the relationship between DPI on the mouse and sensitivity in your operating system, and like any other variables you can tweak there, and like what's the best, like, is it like high DPI, low sensitivity in software the best way to go, or vice versa? Like what are the best practices there?
So there's probably a whole episode here, and I said it 5, 6, 7 years ago when I started getting into PUBG pretty hard. I do high DPI and very, very low sensitivity.
Okay, that's what I've moved to recently. My mouse, I don't know what the high DPI is on this. I've got a G502X Logitech now.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
It's like 20,000 probably at least.
Okay, I am now defaulting to like 3600 DPI.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I haven't put the Logitech software back on this new computer in the last 9 months. I think that I usually do 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, something like that, much more than that. And it moves too fast, even at the lowest possible setting in Windows. But the idea is you want there to be no judder on, like, you want every pixel on Windows on your screen to have multiple samples on the mouse. So you get really, it's kind of like AA for mouse movements.
Sure.
Anti-aliasing.
Yes. It took me a second, but I got it. I just looked up the spec. 25,600 DPI. Is that right?
Yeah, my super light will do 30,000. I think. I can't remember. It's 28,000.
What have I been doing all this time?
Well, so there's two things. Okay. I think there is probably a whole episode here, because there's also the sample rate, which is usually limited by what your USB bus can handle, which is usually like 1,000 samples a second. The thing is, the mouse is going to sample inside that more often than that 1,000 times a second. On most high-end mice, I believe. I think if people are interested in this, please leave comments and we'll do a full episode. I kind of want to get somebody. Maybe we see if Wes comes on and talks about how to set up the mouse the right way. Brad's making a really good face over there.
I'm making I just changed the mouse DPI to 20,000.
Yeah, can you see the mouse as it goes across the screen?
This cursor is out of control.
Yeah. Yep. You're not gonna be able to play Fallout anymore. I'm sorry.
I might have to tweak some sensitivity stuff. Okay, but by and large though, you do recommend like super high DPI and then just set the sensitivity slider way down.
I do super high DPI and really low sensitivity.
Okay.
And then I basically bring the sensitivity as high as I can keep it and get the sensitivity in the games to be where I want. Usually when I have a game, the sensitivity is at like 0.1 if it's a 0 to 1 scale. Like 1% to 5% is where my sweet spot is. Anyway.
I have set it to 25.6 now. It is unusable until I tweak it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to turn it down. So yeah, that's it. Like,
yeah,
it knocked loose all of this, right?
Yes.
Like this optical sensor and the fact that we went from like literally a ball that spins a wheel through a photodiode to, you know, light illuminating a sensor and the sensor sending data to a DSP and the DSP doing some like pretty simple diffs, right? It's like, hey, this part of the image is the same, this part's different, so it's moved this many pixels, and that translates to an X and Y movement. Is pretty straightforward. Now, there was a bunch of stuff that came after that's kind of interesting. Like you asked about laser mice. For a brief moment in what, like mid 2000s, I think laser mice got popular.
Yeah, I remember there being, like, maybe this was very marketing driven. I know there was actual technology under the hood, but I feel like laser mouse, quote unquote, was a big like front of box bullet point.
Yeah. So
at some point.
So obviously, once the sensors got to a certain point, you were probably good. Like for most people, you know, your G5 or G9 from like 15 years ago at this point is probably fine. However, the red illuminated, or I guess now we use mostly infrared lights for optical mice. Eventually, they work really well on opaque and translucent surfaces. They don't work on anything that's reflective at all. So a couple companies built a sensor that basically, instead of using a red LED to illuminate, used an infrared laser that shot out the bottom, and it basically gave a finer control over the reflectance so that it would work on reflective surfaces and even would illuminate into the reflective surfaces. So like the sensor would pick up light inside the glass, theoretically, if you were on like a glass desktop. Now, was it good for games? No, absolutely not. But could you sit on a glass top table in your hotel room when you were traveling with your laptop and use the mouse? 100%. You didn't have to bring a mouse pad with you, which was really nice. The laser mice didn't work well for most people because they actually had the higher precision on the sensor gave it a higher error rate when it was using a uniform surface like a normal mouse pad. So you'd get skips and hops and jumps, or you could actually move it fast enough that you would move out of its field of view because the field of view was a little bit smaller on most of them.
Interesting.
So, also, there was perceived lag on all of them. Every one of them I ever used felt laggy, and I don't really know why that was. I
had no idea that we were not still using this stuff. I just assumed. I mean, I have not kept up with mouse technology, to be clear, but I just assumed the laser was a unilateral improvement over the old optical stuff, and that it was still in use in some fashion. But I guess not.
Well, so the nice thing was there was a period of time when like there was real benefit to keeping up with mouse technology, and like from 2000 to 2010. Like we went through this whole thing where everybody started adding removable weights to mice. Wireless got good enough to play games with suddenly. Logitech in like 2012 rolled out a wireless mouse charger that you just put the mouse on this pad and put a little transceiver, little antenna in where the mouse wheel ball hole would be on a traditional mouse, and it charges the mouse for you when it's just sitting on the pad. It's really nice. The thing is, though, after the sensors hit like 20,000 DPI, you're probably good. If you had a wireless mouse that you liked, you're probably okay.
That's kind of something I've been thinking as we've been talking through this stuff, is like, where else is there to go for core mouse technology? Obviously, you know, you can add customizable buttons and different wheel types and whatever you can think of on the input end, like the user interface end. But for the core tracking technology, what else is there to do? I guess nothing.
Well, so what happened in the late 2010s, like around the PUBG rise when Valorant was taking off, all of that kind of stuff, is fast twitch shooters for the PC came back. You know, Counter-Strike Go hit, and people were playing that kind of game again in kind of a big way. And the enthusiasts started looking at weight. And instead of adding more weight to their mice, like we did through most of the last decade preceding, they were like, well, what if we carve out a bunch of this plastic and take out all of the stuff we're not using? And we saw like Final Mouse and Glorious and eventually Logitech and some of the other companies follow on with mice that were well under 100 grams, which was unthinkable 5 years before.
Yeah, this is how you may have seen you start getting these like really, they're kind of disturbing looking to me. These weird like hollowed out like honeycomb porous looking mice that are literally full of holes.
Yeah, or they'll do things like print them with aerated plastic so that there's bubbles in the plastic or stuff like that. The like I said, even mainline, like Logitech does super light mice now, where it's just an ambidextrous mouse with 2 thumb buttons, like super bare bones, really nice sensor, and it weighs like 80 grams. So, you know, that's the current final frontier. As always, trends come and go. You know, new mice, new things in mice. Some professional will come along and be like, I'm all about that NAGA life. And they'll dig out their 20-year-old Razer mouse with 30 buttons on the side, and they'll be like, we need more buttons. We got to have 12 buttons on each finger for this thing. But until then, I think the ultralights are the kind of the hotness. So
yeah. And again, the image processing, the tracking itself, pretty settled at this point.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any. I mean, look, the DPIs will go higher, but whether Windows will let you accommodate them is the big question I have.
Sure. A couple just random questions and other little things to touch on before we go. You may have mentioned this. What is the exact like method of illumination that's being used now? Because if you pick up your fancy modern gaming mouse,
optical mouse,
there is no light. There is nothing there. So like, is it entirely some spectrum that is invisible to the eye?
It is indeed. Yeah, it's infrared generally. If you aim your phone camera at it, you'll see it glow a little bit red when you look down the hole. It's also a lot less light because the modern CMOS sensors are a lot more light sensitive than they were in 1999.
Sure, which helps with battery life, I'm sure, for the wireless ones.
It does indeed. And the bummer though is we don't have the cool underlighting that we had.
That little glowing red tail was effective marketing at the time.
The other thing is the radio has changed too, because this is one of those things that we originally thought Bluetooth was going to be really good for, and it turns out Bluetooth radios are fine for normal like desktop mouse use, but probably a little bit slow for high end. Like this is why Logitech has the charging pad for gaming mice, right? Because a normal desktop mouse that updates a few hundred times a second will run on a AA battery for a month. A gaming mouse will run for 4 days, for 5 days, or 8 days, or something on that same period. So you do want if you're going to play games with a mouse, it's worth getting something that uses a different. If it's going to be wireless, you want something that's going to run at a higher frequency radio or higher frequency update than your typical Bluetooth radio will.
Yeah, which is, if I'm reading this correctly, roughly like 125 to 500 hertz is about the best you're going to do on a Bluetooth mouse.
On Bluetooth,
from the looks of things.
Yeah.
Versus easily over 1,000 or more.
The other thing that happens on non-gaming mice is that they're really aggressive about when they go to sleep and power profiles. So if you're sitting there and you're like, say you're playing Counter-Strike and you're covering a corner and you're guarding your corner,
that's no
you're
good.
Just holding it, right? Holding that corner. You don't move your mouse at all because you don't want to bloom out your cursor. Your mouse goes to sleep and dude pops out and you press the button and the mouse wakes up and it doesn't register that first shot and you're dead.
Fun.
Yeah. Mouse never should go to sleep. Never let the mouse sleep.
Yeah. The only other thing I was going to touch on real quick, going back to the straight up back to 99, the switch from PS2 to USB. I know you touched on that, like the IntelliMouse. Did it ship with an adapter? Is that what it was?
I think so. I think
that's right.
I don't actually have mine anymore. It's in the garage someplace. I couldn't find it when I went and looked, but I believe it had a USB to PS2 adapter.
That's what I remember.
It might have gone the other way because sometimes they shipped the other way where you had a PS2 that dongle that plugged into USB. But I think Microsoft was usually I think Logitech shipped don't quote me on this, but I think Logitech shipped PS2 to USB and Microsoft shipped USB to PS2 because they were usually pretty pro USB at Microsoft.
Yes, that would make a lot of sense.
But the thing to remember is USB in that era didn't update. The polling rate was pretty low.
Yes.
It wasn't until later that we figured out how to overclock the polling rate and get it up to 1,000 hertz.
That's the thing I was going to bring up. I feel like I remember that being done for the PS2 port as well. Do you remember around this time? I think there were tweaks you could do for both, because I feel like I also remember you could up the polling rate on the PS2 port in Windows for smoother mouse.
It was just adjustable in the BIOS, I thought.
Maybe that's what it was.
Or Northbridge. There was a Northbridge. There was a setting that you could do. It also just ran faster than USB did.
Yeah. So I feel like to this day, and maybe this is just people being set in their ways, I feel like I still see some pro gamers who cling to PS2 ports for mice because they're basically wired more directly to the CPU than having to go through the whole USB stack.
I think that most of the modern, my guess is that your modern hardware is going to be better than that in every, this is like the LCD situation where for a long time our monitors were worse and then CRTs, and then suddenly 10 years after LCDs kind of took off, you looked up and you're like, oh, these monitors are actually better in pretty much every way except for maybe phosphor glow.
Yeah.
I think you're in a similar situation there, but I could be wrong. I'd be if there are any pros in the audience that are hanging on to their PS2 mice, I would love to hear from you.
Definitely.
But yeah, so I thought this was I was kind of surprised by this. I hadn't we had this on the list for this feature years ago, and we started talking about it, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This is who would have thought when this weird mouse with a red tail light and that was silver, nobody made silver hardware back then.
Yeah.
When it looked almost metallic. When it came out, it was weirdly humped. You picked it up and you're like, oh, this looks weird. But then you used it and you're like, oh, this is very comfortable. I like this. It worked for people who claw gripped. It worked for people who palm gripped. It had okay buttons. As I recall, the wheel was pretty squishy, but you didn't have to clean the finger gunk out of the ball every day.
Nope. And that made all the difference.
Because just to be clear, cleaning your mouse, cleaning your rollers was every day, every other day if you used the computer all day. It was awful.
Yeah. It's grody,
really gross.
And again, not to harp on it, but the idea that it was Microsoft that ushered in this change and brought about this massive advancement in mice technology, still to this day, kind of crazy.
Well, they say what you will about Microsoft. I mean, they had their problems in that time period, especially. But they were pretty good about swinging their weight to drive things forward. And I think a bad example of that is how they handled Internet Explorer, right? This is a good example of how they did it. Because who knows what would have happened? Somebody would have invented some sort of crazy rotary encoder that was 4 times the precision. We would have ended up with 3,000 DPI mice, and that would be where we capped out. You'd have a little dedicated mouse ball washer sitting on your desk. You just drop it in and it ultrasonically cleans your balls.
You'd be wearing a proverbial mouse ball around our necks.
Yeah.
eternally pushing a giant mouse ball up a hill.
You could buy aftermarket balls to make your mouse perform a little bit better.
This is a dark future. I don't want to.
Yeah, think about it.
I don't want to entertain this anymore.
You'd have a speed ball. You'd have a game ball. You'd have an RTS ball for all those close, tight clicks.
Yeah.
It's a bad timeline. But I think that's as good a place as any to wrap it up, unless you have anything else.
No, I think that covers it for me. It was a fun time in computers.
Yeah, I'd be curious other products and things and technologies that other folks think would be good for this feature. We have a pretty good list for this.
Yeah.
I think it's neat to look at these inflection points, especially with the benefit of hindsight, and kind of back into what happened and see where it started. And I would love to hear suggestions and feedback on this. It would be really helpful to us.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't rattle off any of our other ideas for this.
No, absolutely
just
not.
Yet. Save those for when we get around to those episodes. But yeah, especially if people just have categories of things. You don't even have to necessarily nominate a product.
Yeah.
If you would want to just say, hey, I don't know, GPUs, or the obvious ones are GPUs, mobile phones, et cetera, stuff like that. But maybe if there are less obvious categories of products where one thing came along and just blew the doors off.
Well, and some of them are really obvious. Some of the categories, some things just don't, it was just a series of incremental changes over time, and there wasn't one watershed moment. But yeah, obviously at some point we'll probably do an iPhone episode. I don't even know if we need to do an iPhone episode, but there's an interesting, like maybe there's an iPod Nano episode, right? Because the iPod Nano is interesting for a whole bunch of reasons, and we'll get into that at some point in the future.
Yeah.
I think that's as good a place as any to wrap it up and remind everybody that this is a listener supported podcast.
It is.
Without you all, we wouldn't be here.
True.
So as always, we want to thank all of our listeners. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you, listeners.
But we also want to give a very special thank you to our executive producer tier patrons, including Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett, Bunny Fiend, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, Paddle Creek Games makers of Fractured Veil, and Pantheon makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Thank you all for your support. We do really appreciate you. And if you would like to find out how to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, it's patreon.com/techpod. You can get access to the Discord. You can leave us a message in there. You can talk about the episode. People are popping off in the episode Discords right now, having lovely conversations about things we've talked about in the last couple of weeks. And a whole variety of other things. There was some really heartwarming stuff broke out in some of the places that I don't expect to see heartwarming stuff yesterday. So
that's always nice.
Yeah, it's good. But yeah, you can go to patreon.com/techpod for $5 a month to get access to the Discord. You get the patron exclusive episode every month. You get access to, I think, the best community on the internet. And that's what I got. If you want to hang out with like-minded people, it's a good place for it.
It sure is.
And that'll do it for us this week. Oh, if you don't have $5 a month, can't spend $5 a month, that's fine. Leave a review. We love reviews. Reviews help us a lot too.
Yeah.
And you can send email if you have feedback on this episode to techpod@content.town. We're doing questions next week.
That's right.
So
get them in. Get
those Q's in and we will turn them into A's. That email again is techpod@content.town. And that will do it for us this week, Brad. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, same to you, man.
Talk to you next week and see you all next week. Bye, everybody. Thanks again to the DTNS crew for letting us take part in this experiment. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the show, please come to techpod.content.town and follow us, or search for Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod in your podcast tool of choice.